Well, good morning. This is the Lew Rockwell Show, and it's great to have as our guest this morning Mrs. Sibel Edmonds. You know, we have a lot of great people on this show. We have just a lot of tremendous intellectuals for freedom and people exposing the CIA and other government activities. But Sibel's a heroine as well as being an important intellectual figure. She was a translator for the FBI. She's fluent, of course, in English and Turkish, in Farsi and Azerbaijani. And she got punished for telling the truth within the FBI. They silenced her for quite a long time. But she wouldn't allow herself to be silenced. She told the truth about what she discovered about various aspects of 9/11, and it's in her wonderful memoir, Classified Woman. And we're of course going to link to that. We're going to link to all her sites. She's director of the National Security Whistleblowers Coalition. We'll link to her site, Boiling Frogs, and to her YouTube channel, her Facebook page, Twitter, and everything else. But Sibel, today I wanted to talk to you. You had some very interesting things to say about the Boston bombing, the Chechen connection, and the U.S. role in promoting terrorism, which then it pretends to fight. So talk to us about that.
Sure, Lou. In fact, about a few days after the Boston terror attack, we put out specific video reports and interviews and analysis pointing out that people keep talking about the FBI angle and a lot of semantics in what took place, and that nobody was talking about the CIA angle. And in our presentation, we brought up everything we have been covering, both in the last 4 years through Boiling Frogs Post, but also during all my interviews in the past 10 years on state secrets privilege, and that the information that the government, the U.S. government, tried to quash and successfully within the Congress and the federal courts, and of course the mainstream media, was the angle that dealt with Caucasus and Central Asia. If people were to conduct a research on all my previous articles and interviews, including the interview you and I did on my book about almost a year ago, I believe.
Yes.
We talked about, and I was emphasizing the importance of Central Asia and Caucasus in my case, and how the gag orders and the state secrets privilege, they were designed to basically quash that part of my case, what I blew the whistle on, which never saw the light of day, because I talked about the CIA NATO covert operations in Central Asia, Caucasus, both directly, but also via our ally and NATO partner, Turkey. This was the extension of this operation known as Operation Gladio. A lot of people are familiar with Operation Gladio as this NATO-U.S. covert false flag operations around the world during the Soviet Union era, during the communism. You know, basically we went all over Europe, Eastern Europe, in Central and South America, and we created terror attacks and basically blamed that on the communists and on the Soviet Union. Now, people and the documents surfaced, and this is after the fall of the Soviet Union. There were some trials and some parliamentary hearings in Italy, because Italy, of course, also was and is NATO ally, and they played a role, not the major role, in these false terror attacks under Operation Gladio. And based on the declassified documents, it's already a confirmed, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's not one of those, unconfirmed reports. It is an operation that after the fall of the Soviet Union became known through all these documents that yes, in fact, for several decades we carried out, and especially in 1980s, and this was the height of it, late 70s till mid-80s, these false terror attacks under Operation Gladio under U.S. and NATO. Now, the false belief is that operation stopped in 1990, 1991, and that the U.S. and NATO, they shut down all the cells that they had placed in various countries, including Italy, and because the Soviet regime fell and the communism was gone. And that is not the case, and that has to do with my case and with my whistleblowing, because one of the most important partners during the initial phase of Operation Gladio was Turkey, again, a NATO member. And of course, you can see the importance of Turkey strategically where it's located. And if you look at the map and look at the, Turkey's neighbors, sharing borders with, countries like Georgia and also with the Balkans. The one cell that they did not shut down, and this is U.S. and NATO, was the Turkish cell, the Turkish arm of Operation Gladio. And the reason for that was that, again, Turkey's position in the region and also Turkey's characteristics, because Turkish people, they speak Turkic language, and this is the language spoken all over Central Asia and Caucasus, okay, when we're talking about Chechens, etc. Turkey is a Muslim nation. Well, this region, Central Asia, Caucasus, they are Muslim. Also, Turkish people share the same heritage. They are the Turkic race, Turkic people, with, again, the people of this region, Central Asia and Caucasus. They are known as Turkic heritage people. So the reason the United States, NATO, CIA did not shut down the Operation Gladio cell in Turkey was they actually intensified operation through Turkey for this region. As we discussed during our last interview a year ago, Lew, if you look at this region, you're looking at the future of the energy resources. You're looking at this region, including Azerbaijan, on Caspian Sea, the vast reserves of natural gas, oil, and minerals. And as I had emphasized during our interview last time, and maybe you would provide a link for people when you post this interview.
I sure will.
Thank you. That in the next 15, 20 years, the focus is going to be completely shift. It's going to just shift from Middle East to Central Asia, Caucasus. You know that there's limited reserve basically with Saudi Arabia, Iraq. What we're going to be seeing, and this is going to include the mainstream media at that point, is going to be Central Asia, Caucasus. So the CIA and NATO, U.S., they did not shut down this Gladio operations, the Turkish cell, and in fact they intensified. And the goal was, and this is what the operations were geared towards, was to use both Turkey, with the Turkish language and Islam, and penetrate these states, both the former states like Azerbaijan and Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, but also the Caucasus region. And you're looking at Abkhazia, you're looking at Chechnya, you're looking at Dagestan, and promote radical Islamism and also the Turkic nationalism. Later, they dumped the Turkic nationalism angle because it did not really work. So the focus by 1995, 1996 was placed on radicalization and the recruitment of these people through Islam, and through various Turkish imams and sponsoring building of mosques and madrasas in Central Asia and Caucasus. And not only that, training and arming this radical Islamists that we were, United States and CIA, through CIA and NATO, through Turkey, in this region. So one of the factions in this region that we recruited and started arming and training and orchestrating attacks through was the Chechen groups, in as you see with Russia. Now, the FBI files the major investigation that I was translating for, which included both real-time information. I was hired after 9/11, but also the file itself started in 1996. It continued all the way till February 2002, was the U.S. angle of these operations, and that is not because the FBI had any territory or authority for what was happening, taking place through U.S. actors in that region, but because of what was taking place in the U.S. with some of the Turks who were actually on the most wanted list, on the Interpol list, to carry out these attacks, because some of these people that we worked in the United States, because we also have a cell here, it was in Chicago and Washington, D.C., with the Turkic actors and some of the leaders from these factions, included, the people on terrorist lists, who were also on FBI's list. So by investigating what was happening in U.S. with these actors, by default, these FBI files contained a lot of the information that dealt with our operations in that part of the regions, because that's exactly what those cells in the U.S. and these individuals were doing together with their U.S. handlers. So if you look at some of the major Chechen terrorist attacks against Russia between 1996 and 2002, I can tell you with 100% confidence, because of what we had in the FBI, that these were actually directed and carried out and managed through our partner Turkey and through the CIA operatives against Russia. Again, to get these people on our side and to be able to have this penetration, these channels into the Russian territory. And this also, and I'm going to put a parenthesis here, includes the western part of China, this area that people refer to as Xinjiang area. Another name for Xinjiang area, and this is the small Muslim Turkish community within Russian borders, and that's the not Russian-Chinese borders. And if, again, you look at what has been taking place since 1996, you're going to see a lot of Islamic terrorist attacks against China in that region, Xinjiang. And the other name for Xinjiang is Turkestan. Why? Because they have the same Turkish heritage, they speak Turkish language, and they are Muslims. Another name for it, some people know the region as Uyghuristan because they are also referred to as Uyghurs. So this operation continued till February 2002, and I was fired in April 2002, and that was the main reason for the state secrets privilege. So after my termination and all the whistleblowing journey for the past 11 years, I've been talking about, look at this region, Central Asia Caucasus, and in this region, all the way until 9/11, 3 months passed after 9/11, we did work with the United States with Bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri in the region because we worked with other Islamic factions that we were recruiting and we were channeling to this region. And these were, some of them were Pakistanis, Saudi individuals, people from Afghanistan in this arming and training of the factions in Central Asia and Caucasus. And of course, mainstream media never printed a single word of this. In fact, in some cases, the journalists with the mainstream media, they were ignorant. They wouldn't even know. They couldn't even point out to the region on the map. If you were to open the map and say, show me where is Dagestan located or Kyrgyzstan, they would say, what does it have to do? We are focused on the U.S. stuff, and she keeps referring to Central Asia Caucasus. In other instances, it was completely intentional because the United States government, especially the State Department, has been keeping this very tight, close lid on any information from that part of the world to be printed in the United States, being covered with the U.S. media. As we all know, we are supporting the dictators there. We are giving them billions of dollars, whether it's in Azerbaijan or whether it's what in Kyrgyzstan. For example, with the Bakiev, the family and the former prime minister or the president in Kyrgyzstan, who's now in exile, where? In the United Kingdom. That is just a little bit of background why I'm familiar with this case. And when the Boston terror attack took place and the words started coming out, for the first time the Americans were really hearing about Chechnya and Dagestan. And the people there, they were always portrayed in the U.S. media until this Boston terror attack as the freedom fighters against Russians, that the Russians were the ones, the bad guys who were repressing them. They wanted to have their own nation, even though they are within Russian territory, they are within Russian borders. So that was how we have been portraying these people, our media, up until this Boston terror attack. With Boston terror attack, suddenly, all of them, and this is the U.S. mainstream media, they discovered this region, Chechnya, and suddenly Chechnya went, and the Chechens, from freedom fighters to the radical Islamists to terrorists, the usual titles. And then the U.S. government started talking about the region, the Dagestan Chechnya region, as one of the hottest Al-Qaeda and Islamic radical terrorism beds. So I invited people, I urged people to pause for a second and say, let's look at the geopolitical aspect of what took place and why suddenly mainstream media taking their dictation from the State Department, they went, our allies, the people we were sympathizing with, just like Mujahideens in 1980s in Afghanistan, the same Al-Qaeda, Taliban people there, the radical Islamists in Afghanistan during the war with Soviet were our friends, and how did we portray them during 1980s when we were arming them, training them against Russia, against the Soviet? They were the freedom fighters. They were incredible people. Then 9/11 takes place, and bam, those same people who worked for us, under us, our allies, the ones we portrayed for 2 decades as freedom fighters, overnight with 9/11, the story switched and they became the radical Islamist terrorists. And, of course, the invasion of Afghanistan and all the wars that we have been carrying out since 9/11. Well, same thing with this Boston terror event. Within one day, suddenly it became Chechnya and Dagestan and even Kyrgyzstan and being the hottest terror cells and the terror bed and Islamic radicals, and amazing. If you look at it in the last 2 weeks now, everybody in the U.S., they know the names Chechnya and Dagestan, and all they think right now is the hot terror cell, and these are the radical Islamist terrorists. So within the first 2-3 days, I came out and I said, you've got to look at the parallels, you've got to look at the geopolitical aspects of it, and you must, and we people, we must look at the CIA connection, because this carries more CIA MO, modus operandi, than the FBI's. And, of course, none of this was ever printed or mentioned within the U.S. media. So we started as Boiling Frogs Post analyzing and putting out videos, interviews, and articles, and inviting people to take a look at this entire event from that angle and broaden the picture instead of getting lost in some of the semantics, which are very, very disturbing, the unanswered questions and what really took place during the event. And as part of that, we were emphasizing the role of CIA in the region. Well, we started doing that, and within 2 days, after we started putting out these interviews and analysis, lo and behold, it became public that the suspect, the brothers, attended the CIA-linked Jamestown Foundation's training and conferences in that part of the world. Jamestown Foundation, and this was leaked from the Georgian intelligence agencies. And again, this was not printed in the mainstream media. The documents surfaced, and if you look at some alternative outlets, you would see that it's a slam dunk documented case that they were active at Jamestown Foundation in that part of the world. And Jamestown Foundation is known to be connected, an extension of the CIA.
It's openly a CIA front, virtually.
Exactly. So again, you won't find traces of this being pounded in the mainstream media. Because why? Because the State Department and CIA, they are controlling the official narrative on what took place in Boston. Now, 2 days after our analysis, this information came out. Then, after we put further analysis, and this was only about 4 days ago, other documents surfaced that are absolutely, I would call them explosive. And that is the fact that, you know, the infamous uncle for the suspects?
Yes, of course.
Well, the uncle was the first one who came out, because all the friends from the universities for the suspects, they said they didn't see any radicalism. They were driving with some, you know, wealthy Turkish students and businessmen in Boston in BMWs and Mercedes-Benz. They were the older brother was going to nightclubs. He was drinking. So none of these, you know, fit a portrait of a radical Islamist guy. Well, who was the first one to came and actually say, yes, they were radical, and in fact, ended up being their own biological uncle. And immediately, this man, this uncle, became U.S. media's darling. If you go and look at all the footage archives, you will see CNN, NBC, CBS, constantly, around the clock, putting this guy, the uncle of these suspects, under the spotlight, and this guy saying how they were radicalized, how they were fanatic Muslims, how they were terrorists, how he had written them off as his, you know, nephews, and constant coverage of this man, right? Well, 4 days ago, these documents surfaced. These are solid documents, okay, that this man, the uncle of these suspects, the terror suspects, the two brothers, he was married to one of the top CIA operatives in that region, Central Asia Caucasus region. That CIA operative, he's a despicable man, is Graham Fuller. Graham Fuller retired from the CIA about maybe 10, 15 years ago, but he has still been working as contractor with the CIA. Now, if people believe in coincidences, even those people right now would pause and say, first, they exposed that the brothers were active at Jamestown Foundation CIA Fund. Then comes the fact that the uncle, who was the first person, and that would make it very legitimate, even their own uncle comes out and says these guys are radical Islamists, right? Well, that uncle happens to be the ex-son-in-law of one of the top CIA operatives in the region. Now, even people who believe in coincidences would pause and say, there can't be. There's no way that you would have this kind of coincidence. Well, even the document surfaced, even though we had the coverage, you will not see this being covered or played out in the U.S. mainstream media because the uncle is part of the official narrative. Now, as with Graham Fuller, this is very interesting, Lew, because about 6-7 years ago, I released a list of about 15, 20 Americans, U.S. officials, both from elected officials but also appointed individuals. And these individuals, with their names, appeared in other sites, but I just put their pictures. I said, well, the state secrets privilege puts a gag order and says, I cannot talk about the FBI targets, okay, in terms of the U.S. persons, officials involved in these terror activities, including the stuff with bin Laden and 9/11. However, I'm just putting these pictures out, and I'm putting a name, and I'm going to name it my State Secrets Privilege Gallery. Well, anybody who was familiar with my case, anybody who was following the case with all the gag orders, they knew immediately this was one way put out there and for people to know who were the people involved in my case and why the state secrets privilege invocation. This was in 2007, end of 2007, early 2008 that this documents went out to people. If you look at that list, you will see Graham Fuller there, okay? Now, Graham Fuller's name just came out, and nobody in the U.S. has ever really heard of him except for some of the books he's written talking about how actually moderate Islam can be very good in that part of the world, etc., which is his fund because he's also active within the academia here in the United States. But nobody had really seen this guy's significance. Now, I put out this name, and people look and say, why would he put this guy from CIA, Graham Fuller? Well, guess what? Graham Fuller happens to be the ex-father-in-law of the uncle for the Boston terror attacks. After we put out this information and some alternative sources, Graham Fuller went to the media and said, yes, he was married to my daughter and they got divorced, but to say that there is any link between these suspects and the CIA would be absolutely absurd. Well, of course, that's what he would say. Now, further documents surfaced yesterday showing that not only that, the uncle lived with him, and this is Graham Fuller, in Graham Fuller's Maryland house for over 1 year in Rockville, Maryland, okay? So it was not just a casual, he was the son-in-law and then they got divorced. No, even after divorce, this man lived in Graham Fuller's address in his house and used Graham Fuller's address as his official address in 1990s, okay? Again, you won't see this being mentioned at all within the mainstream media. So this is, I know I've been talking nonstop here and I'm going to pause and let you ask questions. This is why the CIA angle and the importance of this and a little bit of background and explanation why you won't be seeing this in the U.S. mainstream media.
Thanks to everybody who shops at Amazon.com. I wanted to mention that LRC gets a small commission at no cost to the buyer every time you go to Amazon through an LRC link, any of the widgets on the page for books or other items, or entering through the ad at the top left-hand corner of the front page. So thanks again, and it's a huge help. And Amazon, what a great company. It's just extraordinary. You don't need to go down to the local bricks and mortar place. You don't have to pay, in many cases anyway, sales taxes. So far as I can tell, virtually everything the human race produces is for sale at Amazon.com. So I highly recommend it. It helps keep LRC alive and growing. So thanks to all of you who shop at Amazon. Sibel, hasn't the U.S. for very many years deliberately backed the most radical form of Islam and terrorist aspects too? I mean, as you say, we could look at the Mujahideen. They organized and funded against the Russians. I would say maybe even the hatred of Nasser, who was a secular dictator. They don't like secular dictators. That's why they're trying to overthrow Assad right now. It's why they overthrew Saddam Hussein and then overthrew Gaddafi. These are awfully not good guys, but they want them. But they are seculars, and they want them replaced with Al-Qaeda types, if I can use that phrase. And because it makes trouble, right? It divide et impera. I mean, it's the way empires. It's the sort of trouble empires like to make in order to run things. So in cahoots with Saudi Arabia too, of course, for a very long time. The Saudis have been very, very close. I mean, all of us remember the pictures of the Saudi prince and George W. Bush kissing each other and holding hands and hugging and so forth on Bush's ranch in Texas when he made a visit. I mean, the Sauds are very, very close to the American power elite. And, of course, Obama bowing to the Saudi prince and so forth. And I guess if somebody were giving me millions of dollars, I'd bow to them too. So I guess that's sort of understandable. But the U.S. backs this sort of terrorism and hates the secular, non-Islamic fundamentalist regimes and tries to toss them out. So what does that say about their actual dealings and their actual motives?
No, absolutely. First of all, this started even before the United States with the British Empire, the United Kingdom. They always were known to their modus operandi in their empire building to use religion, okay? This happened in Iran, okay? This is even long before Mossadegh. It was the Brits who always utilized the fanaticism and the radical Islamicism in countries, in nations, for their own nation building and for their empire purposes. And this continued with the United States. Now, during the Cold War, it was against the Soviet Union. So the United States basically adopted the British Empire model. And if you look at a lot of the key figures and advisors in drafting our foreign policy during this era, you're going to keep coming across very well-known Brits, and that is very, very interesting. I mean, I know Israel has always had, starting with Kissinger, their influence or actually direct control over our foreign policy, but you will see a lot of British, UK-based think tanks and fronts that actually guided and shaped our foreign policy, because that's where we took. This is what we modeled after. Basically, it was that, okay, with Russia being communist as the Soviet Union, what is the best way to protect our turf and get countries on our side? Well, when you look at the Middle East and the region, you're looking at Islam, because one of the major preventers in let's say, for countries like Iran, countries like, of course, NATO ally Turkey, and then you can just go through the whole region from actually turning and aligning themselves with the Soviet regime, with the communism, was Islam. Then you're looking at 99% Muslim population, okay? Who are they going to align themselves with? With the atheist communists, or are they going to be, at least, even though it's Christian nation, is it going to be the United States? So that was our modus operandi, that was our tactic during the Cold War. Well, after the Cold War, people say, well, Cold War ended. Well, to a certain degree, yes, it ended. But we still have this very intense competition over resources of the world, okay? And that is both geostrategically. My favorite journalist, Pepe Escobar, refers to it as Pipelineistan. And that is all the region that the pipelines have to travel and go through to get to Europe, and to the United States, etc., and also the nations that have the resources, okay? And you look at the resources, you are looking at Middle East, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and of course the talk that's in the one that hasn't fallen, the last piece in domino to fall is Iran. But then you're also looking at all these Central Asia Caucasus. And of course the Balkans, because the pipeline and the pipeline angle of it. So the competitors being who? The competitors being A, Russia, competitor being B, China, okay? And even though Cold War ended and even though U.S. media really doesn't cover it, there has been this intense competition over the resources, especially in Central Asia and Caucasus. The Chinese modus operandi has been, we go there, we make these business deals with these guys, whether it is in Kazakhstan or if it's Turkmenistan, to basically have 10, 15, 20 years of control over their natural gas and have pipeline, and we basically finance it and have a pipeline for this natural gas to be built that goes from either Kazakhstan or Turkmenistan or any of the stands all the way to Russia, because their need for energy has really tremendously increased. Their survival depends on that energy, and that is natural gas and oil and, of course, minerals. And, of course, these pipelines have to travel through the region, and go through Xinjiang area to reach China. And we talked about the importance of Xinjiang. That section of China, Xinjiang, is a small Muslim Turkish minority over there. Okay? So that has been Chinese modus operandi. With U.S., we don't do that. We like to do this cowboy style. It's not only business deals. We say not only we want the business deal, we want to put our base, military base in your country. What you're looking at, Manas Air Base, Kyrgyzstan, you're looking at Azerbaijan, that is becoming a NATO member in the next couple of years. They have been under NATO training, and now they have fulfilled all their requirements, so now they're going to be officially NATO member. Georgia is in line to become a NATO member, another hot issue between Russia and the United States. So we say, we're going to put military base, okay, and we want to put our puppet guys there, whether it's Bakiev, the tulip revolutions that we brought about in that region, and we give them money, we basically protect their turf as dictators. We put our military base. So it's not only business deal to us, the United States. We are not doing only business deals. We want militarily to take over. We want to have our regime to be installed there, which is a different style than China, okay? So that has been going on with Chinese trying to go and making their own business deals, with us trying to go and grab them and make them NATO member, put our military bases there. Then on the other hand, we have Russia, okay? Now, Russia is a major player in both supplying everywhere, including Europe, with also oil and natural gas, and their pipeline interests in the region. And you're also looking at their territory. I mean, you're looking at these regions. I just mentioned Azerbaijan and Georgia, okay? Again, I encourage people to open up the map and look at it. Azerbaijan, a NATO member basically already, and Georgia is in line, okay? We had that 5-day war between Georgia and Russia in 2008, and still the area is very volatile because Russia is not stupid. They know what we are doing, and they don't like it. And then you look at the new fashionable region that we are talking as Al-Qaeda and terror bed, Dagestan and Chechnya. You would see that Dagestan and Chechnya lie right at the border of Russia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan, right attached to that region. So this is why not only that we are taking over Georgia and Azerbaijan through our military bases and NATO training, but now, and not only now, for the last 2 decades, we've been trying to put our foothold in that Dagestan, Chechnya region. What better foothold than what we have been doing? And that is taking the radical Islamists there in Chechnya, the minorities there, and the Dagestan, train them, arm them, and say, go and create terror attacks in Russia and get Russia bogged down with its radical Islamic terror internally, but also have them as a buffer zone in our territory. And I call it our territory because Georgia and Azerbaijan have already become our territory. And this is the buffer zone. This is exactly, it's within Russian borders, but it's attached to this Georgia and Azerbaijan region. So the Cold War ended, but the Cold War did not end. It is, and again, this is something that most Americans are not aware of. And again, I will go back to Operation Gladio Phase 2, and that is target this region, which is Central Asia and Caucasus, radicalize, arm, train, and create terrorists and actually orchestrate terror events in that region. Now, within that light and under that angle, now we should look at Boston terror and say, what are the ultimate, or what could be? And that would be better because we are still talking about hypotheses. So much information has not been released, and every day the story evolves, both in terms of what took place in Boston 2 weeks ago, but also what other geopolitical developments we are witnessing since the attack, the terror attack in Boston. We have to look at those simultaneously, and then we can have educated guess, predictions, and hypotheses on what could be major objectives in having this pretty much scripted event in Boston.
Just to back up for just a second, and your point about China and oil, no coincidence that in Libya there were 80,000 Chinese oil workers, and China had signed all kinds of contracts to develop Libyan oil. And of course, the minute that Gaddafi was overthrown and the U.S. installed so-called rebels came into power, they immediately abrogated all these contracts and ordered the Chinese out of the country.
Exactly, and that's an excellent example to look at the objectives, talking about Gaddafi, dictator, and our involvement and, promoting democracy. And, of course, we see what's happening in Libya. But what you just mentioned, that is the real reason of what took place in Libya. And, again, you won't see that within the mainstream media. And the same thing with what now we are witnessing, the recent developments with Syria. And the predictions that I put out there is based on what has been happening in the region, especially in the past couple of years, the CIA's role in Boston terror, and what could be possibly the consequences, possible outcomes of what took place. Well, of course, one of the main issues we should right away look at would be Syria. Okay, we went there, and in a few months we basically took over Libya, as you just mentioned. Now with Syria, the whole thing has been dragging. It's been going on now for a year and a half, 2 years. It's just been dragging. Why? Because Russia has been the biggest obstacle, the roadblock for us to go, and invade, take over. Just as we did with Libya, because with Libya we didn't have that obstacle. With Syria, Russia has been, stepping in and saying no, okay? So what would be a possible, implication for that particular issue, which I will explain, and then maybe educated hypothesis of the likely result of this. And the other issue, of course, is what we are doing in the region with Georgia and Azerbaijan. And another hot issue, of course, is Iran. Now, the hypothesis that we put in our analysis out there, and we supported it with, again, all this geopolitical development immediately before and after the Boston terror attack. And that is, this happens a lot, the dirty international politics. And even with our enemies or with our competitors, we make deals, okay? The deals are always made behind the scene. Most of the time, people never find out about these deals. Because when you look at it at the surface, it looks like, well, Russia is still big. Why would we make deal and come and actually form some sort of a partnership on the issue of, let's say, Syria? That just doesn't make sense. But actually, that occurs all the time within the international politics arena. And one possible outcome is that we made a deal, backdoor deal, behind the scenes with Russia, okay? And as part of the deal, we said, with this Boston terror, here's what we're going to do. We want you to step back and let us take care of Syria, okay? And we will set up that narrative, and we will make it so you won't look too bad, okay? And as a result, because we switch hats all the time, and this is just a little side note here. For example, during the Balkan Wars, up until the Balkan Wars began, we had KLA listed with the State Department as terrorist organization, correct? During the Balkan War, the State Department, they said they were going to remove the terrorist label from KLA, okay? They became our allies. And we said, we're no longer going to call them terrorists. They are the freedom fighters, right? After we were done with the Balkans, we went back, and this is the State Department, and they put the label back again on KLA, saying now we're going to go ahead and consider them terrorists again. Another example of that would be the Mujahideen we talked about, Mujahideen Al-Qaeda. They were freedom fighters, our allies, then we put the terrorist label on them. Then we have Mujahideen Khalq, M-E-K, some people refer to them as MKO, against Iran, we've been using them. They used to be terrorists. There was lobbying saying we need to lift the terrorist label because now we want to work with them. And at some point, they will go again under the terrorist label. So this kind of plays out all the time, this story, within the geopolitical theater. Now, with Chechens, they have been working for us, these factions, the radical Islamists that we created, armed, trained. We are looking at Graham Fuller. We are looking at Elliot Abrams. We are looking at Mort Abramowitz. These people are part of Gladio Operation Phase 2, and they all were stationed in Turkey. How amazing is that in 1990s when we began the Phase 2 of Gladio Operation. Now, with Chechens, you say, okay, we created them, they were ours, they're ours. But for a while, okay, for Russia's benefit, we're going to put them under the light of they are the big, bad boogeyman terrorists. They are totally tied to Al-Qaeda. They must be destroyed. They are terrorists, okay? And for a while, let Russia to do some house cleaning. Because Even though it is within Russian territory, Russia has been exercising a lot of restraints in going and doing like major house cleaning, meaning, executing them and have operations and round them up with these radical groups in Chechnya and Dagestan and Abkhazia area, okay? Why? Well, one, they don't want the horrible international rep, because the moment if they would have done this a year ago, Russia, and especially with Georgia and Azerbaijan being our territory, you were looking at some direct confrontation right there, which Russia didn't want. And also the international bad rep. Here is the repressive, fascistic Russians going after these poor minorities, right? Because that's how we've been depicting them. They're the freedom fighters, minorities, and blah, blah. Now, for Russia to go and do some house cleaning and we, the Western world, especially the United States being in lead, portray that as a great counterterrorism support from Russia. Look, Russia is supporting our war on terror. They are going to this region that now suddenly, overnight, after the Boston terror attack, we declared as the hot terrorist bed, and they are killing and rounding up these terrorists. Good for Russia. In fact, we would applaud them, right? No longer the bad rep internationally, and we would also restrain any kind of major conflict or direct confrontation from the Azerbaijan or Georgian side. And Russia would get that because they've been really trying to get into that region, even though it's their own region, and do house cleaning. As a result, Russians would back off on this whole Syria and say, fine, just write down a good narrative that we won't look bad, okay? And you go and invade Syria and we'll step aside. Lo and behold, a week, 10 days after Boston terror attack, now we have these Syrian WMD story a la Iraq, okay? Bam. And not only that, Putin and Obama have been sitting and discussing and saying, well, and this is what Putin and Russians, they have been already preparing. Their exclusion, their stepping aside. They are saying, well, if we prove in somehow, some way, that Syrian government used chemical weapons or the chemical weapons are present, there are indicators on the ground that shows that they were used. Under Geneva Convention, then, we are obligated to, step aside and let this be the problem of the U.S., NATO, United Nations. And we say, look, because Geneva Convention here is playing out, that's why we are no longer supporting Assad's regime. You see, they have a way out to save face. We have a way to get in there, okay, with WMD. Now, to prove the presence of WMD, the chemicals being used, is going to be an extremely easy setup because all we have to prove, because a lot of people being so ignorant, is that there were detectors, UN people ran tests, and chemical weapons were present in high degrees. Well, we have been in the past 6 months supplying these chemical weapons to our Al-Qaeda in Syria, to the Syrian rebels, and Syrian rebels, they have been using it. So if you have inspectors going there, at least they're going to come out saying there is high degree of chemical weapons, residues, etc., is present in the region. And we are going to say, the United States and NATO, here we go, didn't we tell you? They use the chemical weapons. Under Geneva Convention, Russia is going to say, that is basically the last straw, and we're no longer going to support Assad, okay? And we are going to invade Syria, which I believe is going to happen very, very soon. But for the majority who's only looking at the U.S. media or the quasi-alternative, it's going to be, well, we basically found the chemical weapons, and it got to a point that Russians had no way but to accept that this had to take place, the invasion. But if you look at behind the scenes, you see Boston terror, and then you see with Chechnya and with Dagestan. And again, to prove this hypothesis as a likely outcome, about less than a week after Boston terror attack, there was this headlines within Russian newspapers and even RT, which was not played out here in the United States, that Russians carried out this major operation. This was the biggest operation since 2002, Lew. They rounded up 142 radical Islamist terrorists that were Chechen and Dagestan origin. This is the biggest operation Russia has carried out since 2002. Again, people are saying, That is coincidence that they had this major operation taking place. And of course, the Western nations would applaud. They have been applauding. And then the Syria WMD and Russia backing up, people would say, well, that's coincidence. The fact that the major CIA dirty operative, Graham Fuller, happens to be the father-in-law of the Boston terror suspect's uncle, that's coincidence. The fact that the Boston terror suspects, they were active, they were participating in Jamestown Foundation's conferences and events, that's coincidence. Well, it is sad because you would think there is no way anybody would buy that all these things that we are putting within this big picture could be pure coincidences, you know. But unfortunately, as a nation, we have become so numb and we lack critical thinking ability that we readily buy into it. And of course, mainstream media being the major player in this, in packaging and selling what is given to them by the U.S. officials.
Sibel, I can't thank you enough for bringing us up to date on what's actually going on in the sort of dirty business that underlies intelligence and empire building and all the various activities of the U.S. state. I'd love one more question answered. We don't have too much time, but just tell us quickly, what's going to happen with poor Iran?
What's going to happen to Iran? And again, I'm even careful not to call it a theory because so far we have seen so many experts who come up and they make these definitive predictions. It really gets on my nerve when people do that because things are volatile. Things evolve and they devolve, they change. But I believe if I'm correct with this backdoor deal between Russia and the United States, which includes Russia doing what they want to do in that region and U.S. taking over Syria, while Syria is not as big of a deal for Russia, it's a big deal, but not as big of a deal as Iran. I believe that backdoor deal between U.S. and Russia also includes hands off Iran at least for the next couple of years. I don't believe we are going to see any kind of, unless something really evolves and something unexpected surfaces, which I doubt it will. I believe we have also given our word to Russia that, yeah, we'll play the rhetorics and everything, but we're going to go milder on Iran. We're not going to do anything in Iran because there is no way Russia is going to back off on Iran issue. There is no way. I mean, you're looking at Caspian Sea, you're looking at Russian neighbor right there, and of course, Iran's extreme importance. It's not the same deal as Syria. So I believe as one of the deal principles that we made with Russia is that there's going to be hands-off approach with Iran for the next at least couple of years. So I believe you're not going to see anything with Iran, and that's going to be partly with the deal struck between Russians and U.S. officials.
Sibel, it's great to talk to a real expert, and of course we're going to link to your book, to your website, YouTube, Twitter, everything you've got. And all I can say is keep on doing what you're doing, write another book, and keep speaking the truth.
Thank you very much. Anytime. Thank you, Lew.
Bye-bye, Sibel.
Bye.
Well, thanks so much for listening to the Lew Rockwell Show today. Take a look at all the podcasts. There have been hundreds of them. There's a link on the upper right-hand corner of the LRC front page. Thank you.